point now because I support and have signed Amendment 1. And I can't argue the law, I can't argue how many angels dance on the head of a pin, but I can question the politics. And my concern about the politics of the whole bill is that the government is seeking to, words have been used as regressive and repressive. This is nasty legislation. And you have to ask, is it appropriate for a few dozen protesters? This heavy-handed legislation, is it appropriate for that number of people who do occasionally disrupt our lives? And I would argue it's not, and it's almost as if this legislation is designed instead, perhaps, to prevent millions of people from protesting, because the government knows it has lost the confidence of the public here in Britain. And in a recent poll, 2/3 of people thought the government was corrupt. Now that sort of suggests that any legislation this government tries to bring in is possibly not very well designed for the majority of people here in Britain. You're giving powers to the police, very heavy powers, and we've already seen the public doesn't trust the police anyway, and you're giving more powers to ministers, and we don't trust ministers. So it is very heavy legislation. And I'm worried that what you're doing actually is bringing legislation that when there are general strikes and when there are hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets actually protesting about the collapsing and soon-to-be privatised health system, or the fact that everybody's pay is getting squeezed apart from the bankers and the wealthy. That's what I worry about, that you're actually bringing in these laws for far more people than just the protesters. And quite honestly, Insulate Britain, who would not agree with Insulate Britain? It's the smartest thing we can possibly do if we're worried about our energy crisis. And so it seems to me that the government isn't really focused on the protests that we've had so far. They're actually getting focused on protests that we might have in the future. And we now are going to vote very soon on whether or not to declare a protest is illegal if it disrupts somebody. The whole point of protest is that it disrupts life to some point, so that you notice it, so that you start debating it, so that it gets reported in the newspapers. It's incredibly important, in a sense, that protest is disruptive. And I did hear the Noble Lord Hope saying that Amendment 1 wasn't suitable, but I think I have taken advice from lawyers, and I think it is entirely suitable, so I will be voting for it. My big concern here in this House is that we have a government that is simply out of control, and they talk about protesters being out of control, but I think it's the government that's out of control.
The Constitution Committee, as the Noble and Learned Lord Hope said,